Not all men. I'll repeat it, just in case you didn't hear me. Not all men. I know I'm going to have to say it a few more times in this video. I know it's not all men. Women are constantly reminding ourselves that it's not all men, despite an increasing number of indicators otherwise. We put in the work every day to believe in the fundamental good of men, but it's getting harder. I started writing this long before the election, about 3 months before, in fact. I even considered making 2 versions of it because I am hyper aware that women being angry at men does not make them change their minds, and might only push them further towards radicalization. But then I realized that making a separate version of this video to cater specifically to men is once again taking on labor that should not be my responsibility. So what I have to say to those men who might have benefited from a different tone is this. If you are not open-minded and intelligent enough to listen to this video all the way through, then you are not a real man. If you blame your refusal to acknowledge others on my inability to speak more kindly to you, then you are not an alpha or a sigma or anything else. You're simply an Andrew Tate follower, an Asmongold follower, a Sneeko follower, a Ben Shapiro follower, a Trump follower, a sheep. Being a follower will not make you a real man, because you're not thinking for yourself. Watch this video. Understand that I don't hate you. I don't think that all men are inherently evil. I believe all of you are capable of empathy and warmth and growth and happiness. I love you as much as I can love the individuals in an oppressive political class. Anybody who tells you that all feminists hate men wants to keep you oppressed too. They know that if you start listening to women, you'll stop listening to them, and nothing scares them more, because they're not alphas. They're weak men who prey on you, and you deserve better. Not all men, but enough. Being a woman is exhausting right now. So is being queer. So is being visibly trans. Being a queer trans woman? Basically unbearable. Don't even get me started on being clockably non-cis or non-white, let alone the plight of people in countries like Palestine and the Congo, which I can barely comprehend. It's so haunting. But all I ever seem to hear whenever I turn on the news or open social media is about how men are in a loneliness crisis and nobody's talking about it. The news article equivalent of a comedian complaining about being cancelled during their sold-out Netflix taping. Surely, if nobody is talking about it, I wouldn't be hearing about it every other day. From the mouths of journalists all the way to random people on Twitter. Shitter. I'm not even disputing that there is a loneliness crisis among men. I'm sure there is one. I just fail to see how it's my problem.
Why are you hanging on?
Why do you make your lips red? Because they turn red during sexual arousal. That's why.
So tight to the rope that I'm hanging from.
Grab him by the foot.
Off this island. This was an escape plan. This was an escape plan. Carefully timed it. So let me go.
Buck full crazy.
And dive into the waves below.
Okay, so let's talk about this loneliness epidemic, shall we? And I do want to reiterate before I get into this, I don't hate you. I don't think you're a bad person for not noticing how the system favors you. You only become a bad person once you know the disparity and pretend you don't in order to step on others. I'm sure most of you don't feel like you're doing that. In fact, I'm sure a lot of you, especially those who feel affected by the loneliness crisis, don't feel like you're privileged at all. I understand that, but if you have a mother you love, a sister, a daughter, a girlfriend, a wife, a female friend, or a trans non-binary person in your life that you love, and you ignore everything I'm about to say, you officially become part of the problem. That's when you become one of those men that no women will trust. That's when we start to hate you. We'll break it down point by point, and we'll start with the most obvious. These men's rights warriors talk about suicide rates and how men are almost twice as likely to take their own lives than women globally, and 3 to 4 times more likely if you narrow it down to just the Western countries. In Australia, where I currently am, the ABC reported in 2023 that a recent survey conducted by men's health organisation Healthy Male found that 43% of Australian men were lonely, with 16% experiencing high levels of loneliness. In the same article, Dr. Zach Seidler, a clinical psychologist, says, "We lose 7 men a day every day on average to suicide in this country." An American report by Equimundo in 2023 discovered that 2/3 of surveyed men between ages 18 and 23 say no one really knows me. And according to a 2021 study by the Survey Center on American Life, the share of men who lack a single close friend quintupled to 15% since 1990. Worse, 1 in 5 unmarried men report that they have no close friends, and 1 in every 4 of those younger than 30 say they have no close friends. What these reports don't often take into account is the extenuating circumstances around those issues. For example, you've probably heard the male suicide statistic before, but did you know that women are more likely to attempt suicide more than once, but men are more likely to succeed? Worldwide, the data pretty consistently demonstrates what researchers call the gender paradox, that there are around 3 to 4 male deaths for every female death, but that women are 2 to 3 times more likely to experience suicidal ideation. And for every attempt by a man, there are 3 attempts by women. What this means is that while more men die at their own hand, more women are self-harming and attempting to die at their own hands. Individual women are also more likely to attempt multiple times, while men succeed on the first try. There are a lot of ideas as to why these statistics are so striking, but the prevailing theory is that while women are more likely to attempt harm, men choose more lethal methods such as firearms, which in America are used in over 50% of suicides, or hanging, while women skew towards overdosing. Women are also more likely to call for medical attention after their attempt. So, statistically, men are not more suicidal than women. If anything, data proves completely the opposite. I will say this, you're clearly more committed to it, so props to you for that. This is a lighthearted joke from a fellow suicidal person, please don't get it twisted. But that doesn't mean there isn't a male loneliness epidemic, nor does it mean that men killing themselves isn't a huge problem. Anybody killing themselves is a huge problem. I'd like to prevent everybody from doing that. But the thing is, it's all well and good to shine a light on male suicide statistics, but by spotlighting those, other statistics go massively underreported. In 2022, around 80% of transgender people in the United States had considered suicide, while around 40% had attempted it. There has been an upward trend in both the considered and attempted suicide rate since 2000, when 61% of transgender people considered committing suicide and 28% had attempted it. 30% of cis queer teens considered attempting suicide in the last year. The rate of black women dying during childbirth is over twice the national average for Hispanic and white women. Put a pin in that, we'll get to it later. In Australia, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people experience a higher rate of suicide deaths than the general population. The statistics among white men are bad. Any rate of suicide above 0 is bad. But once again, returning it to the context of all in which we live and what came before us, it's not just a male loneliness epidemic. It's a human loneliness epidemic. It's a targeted destruction of safe third spaces and self-presentation until nobody feels safe. We shouldn't compare rates of suicide because it feels inhumane to pit people's misery against each other. But if men are going to keep asking us to, then I will keep reminding them that women and queer people and Indigenous Americans and Australians have a much higher rate of attempts than men do. But none of that discounts male suffering. It's not the oppression Olympics, where the saddest groups win the biggest prize. It's a rigged carnival game where all of us lose unless we stop playing. So, let's talk about all those reasons always cited for why men are dying prematurely. Not reaching their potential, financial issues, the role of men and masculinity in society, and feeling like they're not meeting it, no one they can speak to, stigma around mental health, fear of discrimination. A UK poll suggested that as many as 40% of men have never spoken to anyone about their mental health, despite over 3/4 suffering from common symptoms like anxiety, stress, or depression. I'm genuinely asking the men who might still be watching, even if you're hate watching, do you think that we, as women, as feminists, want that for you? Because as a lifelong feminist, I can promise you, we don't. We don't talk about destroying the patriarchy because we hate all men. We want to destroy it because it isn't benefiting anyone individually, except for a select few elite straight white men on top of the food chain. They won't let those benefits trickle down to you, I promise. If you don't believe me, Google Reaganomics. Bueller. Feminists want men to have a better quality of life too. Maybe a small minority of us don't, but I promise you, it's a small minority. Patriarchy might have offered men superiority as a group over history, but individually it's caused no end of harm, because it requires us all to conform to extremely rigid gender roles. Women nurture, we empathize, we're weak, we're submissive, we're secondary. Men lead, they're stoic, they're strong, they're dominant, They're primary. Non-binary people, they're not real. Don't be silly. Trans people, they're just confused. These ideas have bled into society so comprehensively that they're considered facts to a lot of people. But biologists, psychologists, and anthropologists all contend that so much of that is a manifestation of the socially enforced ideas of what men and women should be, and are not, in fact, biological imperatives. In simpler terms, you are trained to be a boy or a girl from birth because society says so. Or, for you right-wing anti-oversight people out there, the elites in control of the system are trying to tell you who you're allowed to be, and if you try to defy them, you'll be cast out. That's my Alex Jones impression. Turning the frickin' frogs gay. As stated by renowned therapist and lecturer Terry Real in a 2018 interview with Forbes,
we all live under patriarchy, which is a rigid dichotomy of gender roles, and we all know what the dichotomy is. Traditionally, men are supposed to be strong and feel independent, unemotional, logical, and confident. Women are supposed to be expressive, nurturant, weak, and dependent. One of the things I say about those traditional gender roles is they don't make anybody happy, and they don't make for intimacy. I work with men and women all day long in both heterosexual relationships and same-sex relationships, and one of the things I've seen is that in order to lead men and women into happiness and intimacy with others, and really a good relationship inside your skin as well, we have to lead men and women out of the patriarchy, because the old rules were not built for intimacy and happiness. What I've seen is that the essence of masculinity is contempt for the feminine. Misogyny and masculinity are flip sides of the same coin. What it means to be a man today is to not be a girl, not be feminine. The contempt for the feminine is part of the patriarchal culture.
I remember an argument I had with my Christian studies teacher in high school about the evidence behind gender roles, because he cited a study done on babies or toddlers where they put boys and girls into a room with boys' toys, trucks, action figures, etc., and girls' toys, babies and prams and kitchen stuff, and that the boys automatically reach for trucks and the girls automatically reach for babies to nurture. I stuck my hand up, as I was wont to do, feel free to fake surprise here, and asked how it was possible that the study was unbiased. Because if they're babies, as in young enough not to have been influenced by any level of societal expectation or pressure yet, then they won't know enough to even know what trucks are or that they can play with them. And any child who has some level of comprehension will have already been influenced subliminally or otherwise by their own parents and the world around them. He tried to argue with me, at which point I asked to see the study. And he said he would try to find it after class and never did. But it stuck with me. So when I wrote this, I went to look for it online. The only one I could find that actually supported this idea that was done in recent years was this one, which was done in 2016, after I left school, and states that children as young as 9 months old prefer to play with toys specific to their own gender, which suggests the possibility that boys and girls follow different developmental trajectories with respect to selection of gender-typed toys, and that there is both a biological and a developmental environmental components to the sex differences seen in object preferences. And how did they get those results, I hear you ask? They studied 101 children between the ages of 9 and 32 months, 2.5 years. The study refers specifically to a familiar nursery environment for the children, and I'm quoting the article summary of it directly here, to investigate the gender preferences seen with toys. The researchers observed the toy preferences of boys and girls engaged in independent play in UK nurseries, without the presence of a parent. The toys used in the study were a doll, a pink teddy bear, and a cooking pot for girls, while for boys, a car, a blue teddy, a digger, and a ball were used. And from that, they concluded that biological differences do play a part in gender. Do you see how maybe, just maybe, this might be a biased selection? Let's put aside that boys got 4 options and girls got 3, because I don't have time to unpack all of that, but I do want you to take note of it. In order for the children to have a familiar nursery environment, they must have been previously exposed to said nursery environment, which means that they are not free from societal influence. Their parents may have bought them certain toys that lean towards certain gender roles, in which case they'd be familiar with them. The familiar nursery environment might have a similar split in gendered toys, or they might have watched the older children play a certain way and are emulating that, because growing children learn by absorbing and copying. Hell, some of it could even be a total fluke. which we would never know because we can't ask half the children to explain their choices because, again, they're literal babies. One researcher noted that boys gravitated towards the ball most, and the youngest girls towards the cooking pot. And on the one hand, gross, and on the other hand, do you not think it might be because those are the toys that look the nicest to chew on? It also doesn't account for mood, familiarity with certain kinds of toys, color preferences, potential color blindness, or any confusion or indecision on behalf of the children because, again, they are too young to vocalize that. Also, interestingly, the older girls in the study tended to prefer the boy stuff over the girl stuff, which might have something to do with the boy stuff being a ball and a tractor, and the girl stuff being a doll and a cooking pot. Weirdly, once you actually know what a cooking pot is, it's a hard left towards throwing a ball around, rather than pretending to cook. You know, innate woman things. Cooking. It's fine. Like, imagining that that's a gender bi-essentialist thing is crazy, because, like, do you think we had cooking pots in caveman times? No. In order for the test to be watertight, you'd have to take a group of children from birth and place them in a completely genderless environment without outside influences, and then test their aptitude and preferences at select intervals. Now, I am not saying we should do that, largely because that's child abuse. All I'm saying is that we cannot ever create an unbiased study of children, no matter how young they are, because gender has played a part in the child's life from the moment it is born. Remember gender reveal parties? Yeah, exactly. Most of the other studies I found either couldn't conclude decisively either way, or even supported the idea that children don't prefer the correctly gendered toys. That study's from 2021, by the way. A 2023 review showed that gender preferences in play lean more heavily into the assigned gender of the child the older they get. You know, because we live in a society. Boys don't play with dolls, girls must play house, etc. It also states,
gendered categorization of toys limits experience-dependent learning in children, further contributing to gender stereotypes. Children tend to socialize themselves into gendered categories, and cultural gender stereotypes may give kids normative knowledge about what each sex should appear, behave, and think like. Eventually, gender-based prejudices and biases and unequal provision of opportunities during child development contribute to gender-specific underutilization in many occupations, such as in engineering fields. Hence, they must comprehend that limiting children's access to certain toy types could culminate in deterrence of exploring and learning key skills, severely limiting their social, cognitive, and emotional developments.
In other words, we're training boys to be leaders from a young age, and not always allowing girls those same opportunities for growth, perpetuating the existing societal structure that is already skewed in men's favor. Patriarchy. That was only supposed to be a minor anecdote, but do you see how much work I had to do to debunk the prevailing ideas about children and gender? I combed through studies and reviews of studies and citations of studies, and then compared the findings of those reviews and collations to the studies themselves. And then I had to go lie down because I had a migraine, which disproportionately affects women, by the way, but I will get to medical negligence, don't you worry. The point being, patriarchy isn't the default state of the human race. It's a power structure, one that has been implemented to keep a certain subset of straight, white men on the top of the food chain, and all the rest of us below it. And I do mean all of us. Cis white gay men? You're not man enough. Trans men? Hell no. White women? Nope. Black men? Don't be silly. Black women? Don't even think about it. Anybody, man or woman, who is non-white, LGBTQ+, neurodivergent, or otherwise cannot contort themselves into the exact shape of man that patriarchy demands is going to end up shafted. And this even affects you straight white boys too, by the way, because those factors in suicide I mentioned earlier, a significant number of men indicate that their role in society, or lack thereof, contributes massively to the hopelessness that leads to those attempts. Boys are taught, almost from birth, whether directly or subliminally, that they are supposed to lead. Even if you're a cis white straight man, if you don't fall in line with a specific subset of men's ideas of what masculinity is, you're told over and over again that you'll never get anywhere, but they'll make you blame it on us instead of them. They're supposed to be the proverbial or literal man of the house. It's the same lie that capitalism and the American dream sells us. If you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps hard enough, you'll be one of the lucky winners. And fuck everybody you had to step on to get there. Never mind that this is lottery rules where your success is almost entirely based on luck, and the nebulous promise that you might one day get to be at the top, despite all evidence to the contrary. This is how fascism starts. It's not the system that's disenfranchising you, it's insert group here's fault that you can't succeed.
That'll show those poor.
Why are you cheering, Fry? You're not rich.
True, but someday I might be rich, and then people like me better watch their step.
And when men grow up, and they don't immediately become the leader or head of a family, or financially successful, it breaks them. I don't know if you've ever met a gifted child who was told they were going to go places, not helped, not inspired, but told that their intelligence meant that they would succeed. How many of them actually succeeded? And how many of them became so burned out they fell completely off the grid? How many of them went to university, did a postgraduate degree, and then went back to working in retail before suffering two extreme mental breakdowns, changing jobs, and then moved back to the country they swore they'd never return to in order to escape their own crushing failure, and then accidentally became a YouTuber in the process? Just me? Anyway, the point is, the constant, direct, and unspoken weight of expectation on you that follows you into adulthood, and then the realization that you are unable to meet those expectations, even through no fault of your own, is soul-crushing. It's almost worse than people thinking you won't get anywhere at all, because at least in that situation, you can draw on spite to prove them wrong. See every minority person's drive to succeed. So, to reiterate, you, the nebulous concept of men, not you personally, created a system in which men have no worth if they're not in charge, and stepping on women and minorities to stand tall, and then wonder why there's a high rate of suicide when those men realize that when you give other people the option, they don't want to participate in that system. Shocking. Not to mention, some of those white men in those statistics are queer and terrified of being discriminated against or killed, or are already being attacked and are seeking a way out. Even more of these men are actually trans women who can't ever tell people who they are, but can't see a future stuck in the body and environment they're in. Women didn't set up this system. We participate in it because we have no other choice. But we didn't create the gender binary that demands so much of men and then stops the same men from reaching out when in a crisis. But we are expected to fix it. How, you ask? Well, while men don't feel comfortable reaching out to other men for help, society tells them that if they get a girlfriend or get married, this will solve their problems. Not just by allowing them to assimilate into society better, but also because it gives them the permission to talk to somebody about their feelings, because that's what women are there for. We're just receptacles. We're the nurturers, remember? Patriarchy tells us so. Women exist to take care of men, mother them, and then in a lot of cases, even as their partner, we become a mother surrogate. I hate it when Freud is right about things. Who takes care of most of the emotional labor in the relationship. This isn't just normalized, it's expected of us. Now that I've pointed it out, you'll notice the tone of those male loneliness crisis tweets and articles, and it's almost always with the implication that we, women or AFAB people, should be the ones to step up and fix the problem we didn't cause. But don't worry, it gets worse. Now again, just as a reminder, this is not all men. Just touching base for y'all. Letting you know I haven't forgotten. If there are still men here, I salute you. Not all men, but a vocal amount of them profess to be fighting for men's rights when what they're actually championing is male superiority. When you've always been on top, it's not uncommon to mistake the experience of sharing with the feeling of somebody taking something from you. They see this as a form of disenfranchisement because they don't know what actual disenfranchisement feels like. This is never clearer than in the consistent and malicious response to minority or female-led movements, from Black Lives Matter all the way to silly TikTok trends.
The She Deserved the Purse movement is a pay-it-forward movement that women started recently after this video of a purse just sitting alone in like the baby formula aisle. Because everyone knows all too well the story of how many sacrifices a mother has to make for her children. So I believe it was Miss Gonzalez here who started this pay-it-forward movement where now women are going around and like hiding money in baby formula and other things in stores to surprise other mothers once they purchase it and take it home, because you never know when someone might really need that $20, $30, etc. dollars. But as it always seems to go, this story of women encouraging and supporting each other and building these communities and systems of support have upset a lot of men, because these grown men have come to the conclusion that that's not really fair. And so again, instead of taking the time to focus on themselves and maybe starting a movement to support other men, or doing absolutely anything productive and helpful, they've decided once again to just take it out on women instead, because I guess for some reason that's just easier.
This is also why a lot of men think that feminism is about putting ourselves over men, rather than creating a society that sees us all as equal, because their ideology is predicated on a supposed inherent superiority. So they assume that anything that opposes it must also be coming from a place of supremacy. Yes, that is the word I intended to use. Feel uncomfortable yet? Anybody who disagrees with this is called out as an SJW, as if that's a bad thing. Oh no, I'm being a warrior for social justice. How terrible. Women, specifically, who speak out on misogyny and patriarchy, are routinely labeled as feminazis. But we don't seem to have an equal term for violent misogynists who murder us in droves. And y'all don't like it when we just call you fascists for some reason. So-called feminazi beliefs do not align with the fascist ideologies, but that won't stop us being labeled as such. If you want proof of that, I'll see you in the restricted comments of this video. Even if you're a cis, white, straight man, if you don't fall in line with a specific subset of men's ideas of what masculinity is, you're told over and over again that you'll never get anywhere. But they'll make you blame it on us instead of them. There are 2 tweets from men that went viral in the wake of the election that I'd like to mention here. One from Black Star.
I want to make this very clear. Young men have nothing. Literally, we have nothing. No future prospects. Most don't have skills. Most don't have partners, all for reasons outside of our control. All we had was our hobbies, and we couldn't even be left alone to have that. I can feel like the half-smoked cigarette appearing between my fingers as I'm reading this.
And as many people pointed out, and as even Jenny Nicholson pointed out long before this tweet existed, hobbies are not gender exclusive, and the ones that you'll claim used to be, Star Wars, Star Trek, video games, etc., never were. Star Trek wouldn't have gotten as big as it did if it weren't for housewives writing fanfic. I am not joking, but okay. Let's say that's true and women were never involved before. Why is that a problem? Why does women and minorities and the so-called woke mind virus infesting your nerd shit make you feel less safe and represented? Also, literally nobody is stopping you from creating spaces within those fandoms that are exclusively about lifting each other up as men. That's actually what learning to navigate fandom culture is. You don't throw yourself into the ocean of everybody because some fans of stuff are stupid and will make you angry. You find the people you align with in order for your engagement to be as stress-free as possible, if that's what you're looking for. If you want a male-exclusive space within fandom, you can make one. I'll talk more about male-only spaces later, put a pin in it, but aside from the fact that they've existed for years and still do, it's very interesting to claim that young men have nothing. Not having a partner is not the same kind of deficit as not having job security, or not being sure you'll survive through a specific traffic stop. Not having skills is, and I mean this as seriously as possible, a fucking skill issue. Skills aren't fucking hereditary. Even the aspects of them that are, such as so-called innate talent, which I have issues with anyway, but I digress. If you want or need to learn a skill, you do that. There are obstacles, usually economic, but again, the economic hardships you're going through aren't caused by women or minorities. They're caused by a system set up by men that only favors some of you. The second tweet came from Li Fang, an independent journalist who said,
Imagine being an 18-year-old young male voter. When you were 11, the Me Too movement launched and men across the board like you were deemed oppressors. When you were starting high school, liberal politicians closed your school and forced you to take classes online. The women around you don't seem like victims. They are going to college at way higher rates, earning far more than men in many professional white-collar jobs, and are way less likely to be addicted to drugs and as lonely as most of the guys you know. Your peer group of other young men play video games and enjoy memes mocking the dominant, suffocating, woke culture all across the major entertainment and academic institutions. How is voting for the establishment Democrat, who avoided any voting process or scrutiny for her nomination, in any way appealing?
I know so many people have already said this, but if you felt attacked by the Me Too movement, you're a rapist. Or a potential one. No ifs, ands, or buts. Real men didn't feel oppressed by bad men being called out. They joined forces and started campaigning to remove those men too. a la Terry Crews. Also, if you are 11 years old and identifying with rapist, you have way more issues to unpack. Liberal politicians didn't close your school. Trump did. He was in charge when COVID started, remember? Initially, it was a state-by-state shutdown, but the White House under Trump was giving social distancing briefings and greenlighting funding for those who had to stop working. Sure, he very quickly pretended like nothing was happening in order to fix the economy at the expense of hundreds of thousands of innocent lives, but initially, all those commie policies were his. He's the reason the vaccine you're also skeptical of was so fast. Operation Warp Speed. Look it up. I also personally believe, despite living through 3 severe lockdowns in the UK that massively damaged my own mental health, that online classes and lockdowns are better than a slow death from a respiratory disease that also destroys your brain. But what do I know? I only use my brain and lungs to live. Also, the idea that women need to be victims is interesting, because most women I know don't want to be victims. It is true that women are enrolling in college at higher rates than men, but as with the suicide statistics, that's a statement completely devoid of context. The most important piece of context being that women see higher financial returns for college degrees.
College entry, whether it is to get an AS or a BS, helps women gain access to careers where they have a comparative advantage, e.g. office work. Men, on the other hand, have better access to lucrative careers that don't require a college degree, e.g. construction work. This appears to be the most reasonable explanation for why women outnumber men in college. Why wasn't this the case in the late 1960s? Why did the female relative enrollment increase gradually over time? This is because fewer married women used to work in the market, so the investment aspect of college was not as relevant in the 1960s. As women increased their labor force participation over time, financial returns to college investment became more important, and more women choose to enter college so as to gain access to more lucrative careers.
The women supposedly earning more in white-collar jobs might make sense if you take this into account. Women are becoming increasingly more likely to break into these jobs while men have a stronghold on trade-based jobs, if it were true. Which it blatantly isn't. Not only is the pay gap usually wider between men and women in white-collar jobs, in men's favor, obviously, but actually, an influx of women entering the workforce in those jobs can cause the overall wages to drop. According to the US Census Bureau's 2018 community study, women only out-earn men in 34 out of 550 job categories. And a lot of those are healthcare, education, and editorial related. But also, with all the love in the world, why do you care? Why does some women earning more than you ruin your whole worldview? I'm genuinely asking. If it's not just misogyny and patriarchy, why does it hurt you so much for some women to be earning more? Explain it to me like I'm 5. Because women have had to just put up with men earning more, being given more opportunities for years. Women couldn't hold a bank account on their own in America until 1974. My dad was born in that year. He's 50 and a piece of shit, but that didn't make me hate all men, just him. Point is, that's only 50 years of financial independence. Alcoholism is relatively close down the gender lines, statistically, and depending on the kind of drug use, men do develop drug problems more on balance. I'm not disputing the drug statistics, but again, who has the power to do something about that? The women in your lives? Or the man who had 4 years to get the numbers down and didn't, and has now announced a war on drugs because that went so well last time?
The drug cartels are waging war on America. It's now time for America to wage war on the cartels.
Also, every woman and trans person I know is playing video games and enjoying memes mocking the dominant conservative culture. So actually, we're not that different, you and I. The difference is that when I vote, I don't just think about how it's going to affect me. I think about how that vote affects my trans friends, my black friends, my Muslim friends, my Jewish friends, my Asian friends, my disabled friends. I could go on. I even think about you men. It's true. Because I do actually have straight white male friends. Mostly I have white queer male friends and trans male friends, but there are some straight cis guys in there, and I don't want them to suffer just because I'm suffering. Largely because that would make me a dick. And once again, I've spent over 1,000 words debunking 2 half-baked tweets, stating things as facts instead of just discussing the actual issues men and women face. And that's by design. It's a very specific disinformation tactic called fire hosing, where they throw out as many half-truths and outright lies as possible so that we spend so much time debunking the disinformation that we don't have time to tackle the real issues. We have to trawl through this ocean of sludge in the form of misinformation and villainization in order to ever even get close to the causes of the problems. Because those rich men are so desperately trying to make you look at us and not them. And of course, if you're a black man, there are a whole different issues at play, not just misogyny, but also racism and how those things tie into each other. Obviously, being a Caucasian, AFAB, agender person, I'm not the right person to speak on this, but I know someone who is.
For one, being a black male automatically disqualifies you from ever reaching true hegemonic status in a white supremacist society. As I said before, even the most successful, traditionally masculine, educated, moneyed, good-looking black men will be routinely subjugated to racial indignity and submission under a white supremacist hierarchy on the basis of being black alone, let alone any other thing that might intersect with that black male identity. See Ryan Coogler being handcuffed and detained for simply trying to withdraw money from a bank. Terry Crews being sexually assaulted and then publicly blamed for his own assault. Or the entire presidency of Barack Obama, where he was still met with racial indignity as the most powerful man in the world. Regardless of a black man's status and behavior, he will never be a real man under white supremacy. And this leads to a lot of conflict in our own experiences with the world around us and with black women who also greatly desire a performance of us that is similar to white patriarchy. And this is where much of this conflict arises. The fact that black men are essentially being held to a standard of patriarchal performance that they cannot keep up with, even from many black women. When you combine that conflict with legitimate issues in the family court system and a modern media landscape, especially social media, that makes black men feel disempowered in speaking up effectively, you see where the black manosphere gets most of its juice.
A big part of this loneliness epidemic, outside of everything I've just talked about, is this yearning for connection. If it's too beta to reach out to other men, the only other option you have is the women in your life. And once you're too old to lean on your mother without it looking bad to other men, you start to look for another woman to lean on in the form of a partner. But as almost every woman I've ever met will tell you, becoming a man's live-in mother is exhausting. Doing all the emotional labor in a relationship is a huge imbalance, and most women, once they've experienced that once, will do their best not to date someone like that again. So if you blame women for not being able to date because they're not willing to engage with you emotionally, I suggest befriending some. I am being 100% serious. This video by Some More News says it way better than I could, but if you start befriending us, actually seeing us as human beings and not sex objects or receptacles for your emotions, you will start to get less lonely as a byproduct of that. Not only will you have gained friends, but you will also get better at regulating and talking through your emotions and listening to others, and that will make you a better dating prospect. Feels like it should be logical, and yet so many men don't seem to get it. And look, if you're one of those Andrew Tate, Trump, or Sneaker guys and you're somehow still watching this, first of all, mad props to you, honestly. I know it must have been hard to even make it this far, but to speak in your own language, you've been fed some weird lie that women are either the cause of your problems or that they should be fixing them. Neither of which are true, but what is especially concerning about that is the idea that men who need to dominate women to fix their own issues are strong alpha sigma men, when in fact there is nothing more cuck-soy than needing women to fix your issues. You don't have the balls to open up to your boys over a beer? You don't have the strength and veracity to take rejection and keep putting yourself out there? You can't cope with the idea of a woman earning more than you? Decidedly not attractive. Not alpha. Not sigma. Not a top G. Women aren't attracted to men like that, which is why they've spread this rhetoric about being owed sex, or the idea that rape isn't a problem because men are the dominant class and women should submit to them. Ugh. To that, I say, oh, you need to rape a woman to feel better about yourself. Beta. But I will say, men like that, Andrew Tate, Jordan Peterson, the Fresh and Fit podcast, and all the other public speakers of that motivational, misogynistic, anti-woke ilk, they know how to sell themselves. They start off giving great advice. Envision your goals, imagine yourself conquering those goals, embody the alpha mentality, treat yourself like somebody you're responsible for helping, go to the gym, go out and meet women, make friends. All great ideas. All great ideas. And then, once they've sold those ideas to you, like they're revelations, they'll drag you further down their rabbit hole of hatred. Not because they care about you, but because they care about their own bottom line. Can't sell a course or a book or merch if there's nobody willing to buy it. You're not a sucker for falling for it any more than you'd be a sucker for getting entrenched in a cult. They go after you because they see you as weak and they know you'll follow them. I don't see you as weak. You're a man. And sometimes that feels unfair, and sometimes it feels like you're being blamed for all of the world's problems just because you exist in a certain body. That's unjust. It's prejudiced. It's discriminatory. Because you look like a certain kind of person, the blame gets foisted at you, even though as an individual, you have no say in the power structures we exist under. Sure, some guys out there are bad, but you've never hurt anyone. You've always been nice to women. How could the world turn on you like that when you've never done anything wrong? Congratulations. You have about 5% more of an understanding of what it's like to exist as a trans person every day, or a black person, or a Muslim, or a Jew. This is why we get frustrated with the idea that in order for men to stop voting against our interests, we have to be nicer to y'all. Because where has that gotten us so far? Our legitimate disenfranchisement has collectively made us more empathetic, but your taste of being blamed for the world's problems sends you spinning out. As a white, female-passing person in a first-world country, I am subject to immense privilege. As a working-class, neurodivergent queer person from an abusive household, I am also subject to huge disadvantages. Societally, as a woman, I experience some discrimination, but as a white person, I feel that on a much lesser scale than black or Muslim women. As a neurodivergent person, I'm extremely handicapped in the workforce, but I am one of the few neurodivergent people who has managed to hold down jobs despite these struggles. That doesn't make me better than those other people. That means I got lucky and found jobs that catered to my needs better. And when I worked jobs that didn't, I almost drove my car off a cliff. As a poor person, I will probably never buy a house or experience the comfortability that comes with wealth. But I still experience the privilege of having enough money to afford to live with a roof over my head and 2 to 3 meals a day. I was able to attend school regularly and focus on my studies instead of working jobs to support my family. And despite the homelessness epidemic, video coming soon, watch this space, I am okay. I'm not great. It's still a huge struggle, but I'm okay. I'm not in Gaza. I'm not in the Congo. I'm not in a red state in America. By an accident of birth, I have more privilege than millions of other people, and I am still underprivileged. The key is not to turn my anger at that disenfranchisement onto people who can't do anything about it. I don't blame other women or minorities for my struggles because they didn't cause them. I don't even blame men for my issues. I blame the patriarchy and misogyny and some men. I blame the individual men who abused me. I blame the men who stood by and did nothing. I blame the men who get away with heinous crimes day after day. But I don't blame all men. I just blame the system that your gender created and that you benefit from, whether you can see it or not. And if you're not convinced yet, why don't we talk about men being the societal default?